When I first laid eyes on this tool, I couldn't make sense of it. It was heavy, solid, and almost completely locked in place under decades of rust. No markings, no clear function, just a frozen piece of history that looked more like a mechanical puzzle than something practical. For a long moment, I simply stared at it, wondering if I had stumbled across an unsolvable mystery. Could this be an old press, a cutter, some kind of measuring device? Or maybe something so obscure it had long since disappeared from common memory? I wanted to know, and the only way to get answers was to begin the restoration. Because with rust, every layer you remove reveals not just the metal beneath, but sometimes secrets about its design, its maker, its time in history. And this one was completely covered, so locked down that I could barely move a single part. As I placed it on the bench, I could feel just how long it had been sitting unused. The rust wasn't just surface level. It had worked its way into every seam, every joint, every screw. This wasn't going to be a quick project, but the mystery was too good to pass up. The first step was disassembly, or at least attempting it. Every bolt I touched felt like it was welded in place. I reached for penetrating oil, gave the metal a generous soak, and waited. Nothing moved. I added heat, tapped lightly with a hammer, and slowly, over the course of several long minutes, a bolt began to budge. That tiny shift was encouraging. Proof that patience would be my best tool here. Piece by piece, I fought against the grip of time. Some screws came reluctantly. Others snapped, reminding me that restoration is never just about skill, but also about accepting losses along the way. Each stubborn part told the same story. This machine had been abandoned for decades, maybe even generations. By the time I had separated the main body from its moving arms, the bench was covered in flakes of rust and dust. It looked like I had just shoveled dirt out of a garden, except this dirt was metal that had decayed in silence. But progress meant moving on to the real challenge, the rust removal. I prepared a bath of rust remover and carefully lowered the first pieces in. Almost immediately, you could see tiny bubbles forming as the solution started its chemical work. Hours later, when I pulled the parts out, the difference was incredible. Beneath the orange-brown crust, there was still strong steel, still usable, still waiting to work again. Other pieces needed wire brushing, sanding, and even some electrolysis. I wanted not just to clean the surface, but to free every moving part. The smell of oil, the sound of metal scraping against metal, and the sight of rust lifting away is always satisfying. Like peeling away history's grip, one layer at a time. Slowly, handles began to turn. Springs loosened. Gears that hadn't moved in who knows how many years finally rotated again. It was only after the rust started to lift that the true shape of the tool came into view. The grooves, the clamps, the guide rails, it wasn't random. It had purpose. And then, like a puzzle finally solved, it hit me. This wasn't just any mechanical contraption. It was a manual key cutting machine. Think about that for a second. Before computer programs, before automated laser systems, locksmiths used machines just like this to duplicate keys by hand. You'd clamp the original key on one side, a blank on the other, and then trace the grooves with a guide while the cutter carved the new key. Precision, patience, and craftsmanship, all built into one mechanical device. The fact that this tool had been hidden in rust for so long made its rediscovery feel even more significant. Restoring it wasn't just about bringing back a machine. It was about connecting with a time when security relied on human skill, when tools like this were essential in every locksmith's shop. Imagine the stories it could tell, the doors it opened, the locks it duplicated, the people who once relied on the craftsmen who used it. This machine wasn't just a piece of steel. It was part of daily life decades ago. As I kept working, cleaning, and polishing, I thought about those locksmiths. Someone, maybe in the 1970s or 1980s, stood in their shop running this very machine. Customers came in, handed over worn keys, and left with fresh duplicates. Day after day, this tool earned its keep. And then one day it was set aside, maybe replaced by a newer model. Maybe the shop closed. Maybe it was stored in a dusty garage, forgotten and slowly surrendered to rust. Until now. With the rust removed and the parts freed, I began the process of full restoration. Polishing each surface, lubricating moving parts, aligning the guide rails, sharpening the cutter. It was careful work, but every step made the tool come alive again. Handles turned smoothly, clamps held firm, and the machine looked less like a relic and more like something ready to go back to work. Reassembly was the final challenge. Each piece had to fit precisely, each screw tightened carefully, each spring stretched back into place. It felt like building a puzzle backward, and only this time I knew exactly what the picture was. When it was finally back together, the transformation was stunning. What had once been a block of rust was now a fully functional key-cutting machine again. For the first test, I clamped a blank key and slowly traced the guide. The cutter moved confidently, carving into the metal with sharp precision. The machine worked. After decades of silence, it was cutting again. That sound, metal on metal, clean and sharp, was like music. Proof that the effort, the hours, the struggle against rust and time had been worth it. But no restoration story is complete without addressing the controversies. Some viewers questioned the age of the machine. I had initially thought it might be 150 years old, but careful examination told a different story. Components like the capacitor and even the wiring suggested a manufacturing date between 1970 and 1980. Others confirmed it, pointing out the ground wires, the design of the parts, and the materials used. And they were right. This wasn't a 19th century relic. It was a late 20th century workhorse, and honestly, that didn't disappoint me at all. Because the story here wasn't just about age. It was about rediscovery, about taking something forgotten, locked in rust for decades, and giving it life again. Whether it was 50 years old or 150 didn't matter as much as the fact that it was once important, once useful, and now, once again, it could be appreciated. So as I stood there, watching the machine hum through its first new cut, I thought about how objects carry stories. To most people, this might have looked like a hunk of useless metal. To me, it became a reminder of how history hides in the everyday. A locksmith's machine, forgotten, reborn, and now part of a story bigger than itself. And that's the real joy of restoration. It's not just about cleaning metal. It's about connecting past and present, about uncovering the mystery behind forgotten tools, and about bringing back the dignity of craftsmanship. This project reminded me that sometimes the most ordinary objects have the most extraordinary stories. And as long as there are tools like this out there waiting to be found, there will always be mysteries to uncover, rust to fight, and history to restore. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the transformation, the mystery, and the story behind this tool, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. There's always another relic waiting for its second chance. And I can't wait to show you what comes next.